on homelessness in Alameda County. My name is Vince Steele. I work in the office of Supervisor Keith Carson on housing and social services policy. Thank you all for taking some time on a weeknight to be with us, to be in community with us. I understand there are about 254 people registered for this event. So we deeply appreciate you all and thank you for spending the next hour and 15 minutes with us as we discuss this very important topic. Tonight, we have several speakers lined up to talk to you about the unsheltered crisis facing our communities. Our goal is to leave you with a basic overview of county, city, and state responsibilities as it pertains to addressing homelessness, and how county and city leaders work together to achieve those goals. There's often a lot of overlap in the work that is done, from encampment management, medical services, to providing temporary housing. In this town hall, we want to give you a glimpse of how all that comes together. We're going to discuss the challenges and opportunities for growth here in Alameda County. We're going to talk specifically about the cities of Oakland and Berkeley. And most importantly, we're going to discuss how you, our community, our constituents, can get involved to help move this work forward. This town hall will be recorded, and we will be uploading the recording to our Alameda County website in the next few days. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions of our guest speakers. So please raise your hand at the end. It'll be around the last 10 to 15 minutes of the program, and we will call on you to say your question out loud. Also, if you don't get an opportunity to ask your question, I will be putting my email in the chat. We want to make sure we address all of the concerns you have out there as best as we can. So please just email me directly if your question doesn't get heard, and I'll try my best to respond as soon as possible. Okay, so with that, I want to bring up our supervisor of District 5, Keith Carson, to talk to us about the efforts that have been made in Alameda County to tackle the homelessness crisis.
Thank you very much, Vince. I appreciate it. And I want to say a special thank you to all of the people who work on staff and do the incredible work that you do each and every day for District 5, Amy and Vince and Jordan and the whole team that has been involved, especially in setting up the series of town hall series on homelessness and housing here in Alameda County. And I also want to say a thank you to our panelists and presenters. They'll be more formally introduced a little later on from the city of Berkeley and also Oakland and Alameda County. I want to say thank you for Vince for coming up with the idea of hosting this series so that we could not only update individuals in Alameda County and hear from them in terms of how what they think and how to approach this ongoing challenge of individuals living unsheltered here in Alameda County. But also we'll be able to update you about other efforts that are taking place that will be very vital to our local efforts in the county, trying to address the issue of the unsheltered. Anyone who has been to Washington, D.C. Recently or in the last several years, I'd say 5-6 years, if you're visiting the United States Capitol, the House of Representatives, just 3 blocks away from the United States Capitol, as you approach Union Station within walking distance, you will see masses of individuals living unsheltered on the street, many near open grates to try to collect the heat from the metro system that goes underneath them. Today, I was in Sacramento most of the day, and part of the meetings that we had in Sacramento today were around homelessness here in California. Just 1 block away from the California state capitol are individuals living on the street, having no place else to go. And that gives you an example from a walking distance of areas that make major decisions about budgets that oversee all of the programs in our nation and in California, that we have, unfortunately, individuals living unsheltered. There are numbers that say that in the county of Los Angeles, on any given night, there are more than 64,000 by the last point in time count, 64,000 individuals who are living in Los Angeles County unsheltered, individuals who are living on the street, in cardboards, under overpasses, maybe in abandoned buildings and in their vehicles. And I only say this because of the fact that this is a very massive challenge that we have throughout this country, unfortunately, that is increasing, and especially the state of California. And we realize this each and every day in our own communities as we travel in and about for our business, school, and recreation here in Alameda County. In March of 2018, our office hosted, along with Alameda County, the first ever convening of all 14 cities in Alameda County around the issue of those living unsheltered. This was way back in March of 2018, and we hosted it in the city of San Leandro. Mayor Jesse Arreguín was present, Libby Schaaf was present, most, if not all of the mayors in the 14 cities, including Hayward and Livermore, were present. And as important, individuals who oversee in those respective cities, the issue of homelessness and dealing with those unsheltered, the technicians, the individuals who are meeting with people face to face, were in that all-day working convening. It was a working session, not just a data gathering session, but a working session, the first ever, to say how do we collectively together in Alameda County try to address this issue of those who are unsheltered. We started that day with a video that had been taken to hear the voices and see the conditions that people were living in throughout Alameda County. A young lady in the city of Berkeley living in an abandoned vehicle with her infant child, all the way to Livermore, where individuals were living in an encampment in Livermore and all of the cities therein. That's how we opened that convening in March of 2018. And after we had the video and the testimonials of individuals who are living unsheltered, before any politician spoke, before anybody else said anything else, we had a panel discussion that was made up of individuals who are living unsheltered, and also those individuals who are working in our cities and our counties, attempting to support and help their needs. So we started out with a listening session with individuals who we were talking about leading that convening and conversation. Since 2018, Alameda County has launched multiple initiatives to take the county's ongoing homeless crisis and to try to address that. We have had regular meetings with the Mayor's Conference of Alameda County. And again, those individuals who are working in the respective cities and in counties and throughout to try to work cooperatively and leverage our scarce resources and our intelligence to provide this overwhelming challenge that we have in this country, the state of California, and that we notice each and every day in our own community. On November the 20th of 2018, the board adopted the Alameda County Homeless Council Action Plan that laid out a 3-year framework for how the county was going to tackle this impending crisis. Due to the complications that hit us as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, the county bolstered the plan by adding additional incentives and initiatives to limit the spread of homelessness. In this presentation, I want to take a few minutes to highlight the initiatives and outcomes that were produced as a result of this 3-year plan that we started way back in 2018 that was gravely impacted as a result of COVID. The action plan allocated over $330 million during a 3-year stretch, allocating exactly $249 million towards ongoing investments and $90 million in one-time investments. This is over and above what cities and counties were already doing prior to the pandemic. And again, the context is this is how much we were spending coming in the very beginning of this pandemic. The action plan was concerned that with investing and bolstering these 5 critical areas to address the homeless crisis, and we have them on the screen in front of you. Homeless prevention services, outreach program and unsheltered individuals, addressing the issue with respect to health and supportive services, shelter and housing development, and the development of a coordinated entry system. Some of the things that we were talking about today when we were in Sacramento with the 58 counties here in California and the other statewide representatives that were at our meeting in Sacramento. Let me go through those real quickly in terms of the homeless prevention services. Alameda County launched multiple programs to prevent the homeless crisis from increasing before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. By partnering with multiple municipalities and departments, the county was able to launch multiple support programs to prevent homelessness, to going even further. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Alameda County created COVID emergency rental assistance programs, allocating over $129 million for all of the cities, except for the city of Oakland and Fremont, which was able to get their own allocation because of their population that they have. As of January 2023, the county has approved over 9,587 applications. We are also allocating over $128 million for rental assistance funds for applicants as well. We created an anti-displacement financial and legal assistance through our Alameda County Housing Secure, when the county allocated over $6.9 million to support individuals who were in housing but were still insecure. Through our social service agency and our housing emergency lodging program, which we refer to as HELP, we provided one-time crisis-based financial assistance for critical housing needs to help homeless individuals find permanent housing and support those at risk of becoming homeless. In order to deal with the issue of homelessness, we have to be able to have long-term permanent housing for individuals. Otherwise, we will just be putting a Band-Aid over the issue. And so our attempt was to coming up with long-term housing for individuals as opposed to just temporary housing. But also, Alameda County came up with the numerous programs to support homeless individuals that had basic and essential needs. Some of these needs were the ARCH program, which many of you may be familiar with. The county allocated over $22 million and served thousands of individuals who tested positive and needed to isolate at home, but could not get paid. Could not get any paid leave. And so we know that individuals who were working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs that contracted COVID, while told to isolate, were at least given some bridge funding to try to assist them while they were trying to get healthy and get back to work. We provided stipends for seniors, CalWorks timed out participants and general assistant clients. And we also made sure we focused on transitional age youth because we know we have a number of transitional age youth that are living unsheltered as well in this county. We provided emergency food assistance through our vendor pool. Between 2020 and 2021, the county allocated $83.9 million to help support those at risk of experiencing food insecurity, going completely hungry because they couldn't afford the high cost of food. In the area of shelter, what we did was a COVID project that many of you may be aware of called Project Home Key, which was a state program designed to help the development of housing for those who are unsheltered. Since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, the county has over 10 home key sites across various cities, totaling over 711 housing units. Let me say that many of us, and especially some of the presenters on the table or on tonight's panel, were at the table along with the county attempting to negotiate with hotel owners access to using those hotels which were vacant at the height of the pandemic. And I have to say that in many places, while they were vacant and didn't have revenue coming in, they gouged us in terms of being able to negotiate not a fair price to have a long-term lease, or in some cases purchase the hotels. And in many cases, we had to engage in housing people at inflated costs. We also had the SHADE program, which was to increase outreach and housing to people who were victims of human trafficking. The Interfaith Council of Alameda County, under the guidance of Ken Chambers at Westside Missionary Baptist Church, started a safe parking program. And there were a number of safe parking programs throughout the county that were established all the way into San Leandro and beyond to try to make sure that people would be able, who are unhoused, that were living in their vehicles, would have someplace secure with electricity and running water to go. We had the Youth Spirits Artworks, which was serving as a case management service for those who lived in the tiny homes community, those unsheltered transitional youth in particular. And this was housed primarily in East Oakland. Throughout the county, we had these efforts going on, just like Love Never Fails, which is a transitional housing program in Hayward, California. So Alameda County attempted to put together a coordinated entry system to ensure that we coordinated and leveraged our scarce resources. We communicated with everyone to the extent that we could and established this even during the pandemic, which was difficult in many times to get together in the initial stages before Zoom became so prevalent and our ability to do that. Alameda County has served millions in that area of the coordinated entry system, in which we have individuals who go out to encampments, go out to places where people are living unsheltered on a routine and regular basis as a team with health and individuals in the health area, mental health area, to attempt to provide housing directions to individuals. We established the Homeless Provider Incubator Fund, which is a byproduct of the coordinated entry system, which was launched in 2020. And we allocated and distributed over $950,000 in total funds to 4 nonprofit organizations that were closer to those communities. They were trusted members of the community to try to provide those much needed services that people still have and need today. Let me kind of wind down by saying Measure A is an area where we had the residents of Alameda County put a bond on the measure way before the pandemic to make sure that we would be able to subsidize and build affordable, 100% affordable housing, not 20%, not 50%, not 80%, but 100% of the Measure A1 dollars have gone towards the development of affordable housing in partnership and many times with some of our affordable housing developers. This $580 million bond measure was passed way back in 2016, and we began way back then to create over 3,990 affordable housing units throughout Alameda County, not just distributed in one city, but throughout Alameda County. We have over 1,325 rental units that are still under pre-development stage and over 806 that are currently being developed. We also, as you may know, have the rental development programs and that has come up with at least 46 multi-family affordable rental projects. And we've spent over $420 million out of the $425 million A1 funds that have been committed towards affordable housing. None of this has been done by one entity, meaning the County of Alameda. And I want to thank my other elected colleagues who have been at the table on this, like Dan Cow, who I know has joined us tonight, and there may be other city council persons and others who've been at the table attempting to try to figure out how best we can move putting people into permanent long-term housing, providing them with wraparound services, giving them an opportunity to get back into employment, and again, hopefully feel good about rejoining our community that we all love. So again, I would like to say thank you very much for joining us tonight, the first of our series around homelessness and housing. I want to say thanks to my staff for putting this together, and a big thank you for the people who are on the panel, because 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they have for years been spending every waking hour in the space of trying to deal with individuals who are homeless. Thank you very much. Vince, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Supervisor, for lifting those programs, especially coordinated entry, which is really essential to pulling city and county together to address services needed for the unsheltered. Really tackling homelessness is a team effort, and I'm glad you talked about that. I want to bring in our next speaker, Kerry Abbott. She is the Director of Care and Coordination, to highlight more of the programs and services of Alameda County. Kerry?
Hi, Vid, sorry about that. Just trying to bring up the presentation.
No problem.
There we go. And now how about we do this as a slideshow? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that delay. I'm Kerry Abbott, and I am the Director of Alameda County's Office of Homeless Care and Coordination, which our Board of Supervisors established within the Healthcare Services Agency at the very end of 2019. So as you can imagine, most of our first couple of years were extremely busy working with the county and all of our cities and nonprofit partners and people experiencing homelessness on how to stay safe during COVID. Supervisor Carson mentioned the Home Key Project. Of course, we also stood up over 1,000 units of Project Room Key to help people during isolation quarantine and to shelter in place. So it definitely has been an exciting 3 years since our office started. And I'll just go through some information about homelessness in Alameda County and some of our current responses. So the 2022 point in time count was conducted last February, just about a year ago. It was delayed because of COVID and then also delayed because of weather, but we did conduct a count in the beginning of 2022. As was mentioned, we had over 9,000 people experiencing homelessness on that one night of February last year. The total number has gone up from just over 4,000 in 2011 to 9,747 in 2022. We also saw an increase in the people in sheltered situations in 2022, not surprising since we had added so much shelter during the pandemic. We saw a decrease in the number of homeless individuals with HIV. We saw a decrease in homeless veterans. We saw an increase in chronic homelessness, so people with disabilities who were staying homeless for longer periods of time. And we saw a significant increase in the number of people living in vehicles, in cars, in vans, and in RVs during the 2022 count. Even with the increase in the percentage of people in shelter, we still had only 27% of our homeless count was in shelter and 73% were unsheltered. Sorry, it doesn't want to advance. There we go. So as many of you know, as many of you see, I've seen many of our providers and partners in this work in the audience today, and we're so glad to have you here. We are working on an epidemic of homelessness that has vast racial disparities. We see that in Alameda County with 10% of the population being African-American or identifying as Black or African-American, 47% of the homeless count last time were surveyed as African-American and 43% this time. We also saw disparities, especially in the American Indian or Alaskan Native population. We saw some increase between 2019 and 2022 in the percentage of people who identify as Latinx as well. Why people become homeless, this is something that people like to speculate on. So of course, we asked people experiencing homelessness, what was the cause of this incident of homelessness? And the most common response was that family or friends couldn't let them stay because of an argument with family, friend, or roommate. So a lot of people are coming into homelessness directly from staying with friends and relatives and are no longer able to stay. We see 25% have had an eviction or foreclosure most recently, 22% because of job loss, and then we have substance use, other money issues, et cetera. But when you combine the family or friends and eviction foreclosure, we clearly have a lot of people going from a place where they had a safe place to live and losing that housing is the reason for homelessness. It sounds obvious when you say it, but there's always so much speculation about other reasons and other factors. And what we've learned is that all of those other factors can be present and someone can still maintain housing. So losing the housing and having increased rents and evictions is what is bringing people actually out onto the street. Some things that we also saw in the 2022 homeless count, 16% of people who are homeless for the first time said that that was caused by COVID. We had very few people in Alameda County who said that their homelessness was caused by wildfires, but 83% it could tie back to the eviction or the family and friend losing their housing. Just a little bit of demographics here. One thing is that 49% of the people that we talked to had psychiatric or emotional conditions. 42% had PTSD, 34% had chronic health conditions. About a third of the people experiencing homelessness have a physical disability. And under that is drug or alcohol abuse. Then we have significant numbers with traumatic brain injuries and HIV or AIDS as well. One thing that's always important, I think, to point out is about 9% of the people experiencing homelessness are people in families with children. We also have about 8% are youth ages 18 to 24. So the county homelessness response. We adopted last year the Home Together Plan. Our County Board of Supervisors endorsed the Home Together Plan, and the majority of our city councils and the Mayor's Conference endorsed Home Together. What we have done is taken many of the strategies already held up by Supervisor Carson in the Homeless Action Plan, and then looking at those in a way that centers racial equity in each of the activities needed to take on prevention, to take on increasing shelter and increasing housing solution. And then using data to really create a needs analysis and to inform the pathways out of homelessness. So the needs analysis includes data, but also focus groups and direct input from people experiencing homelessness who were a significant part of our strategic planning work. And then ensuring that our system is working to end homelessness. Of course, we are focused on unsheltered homelessness with the rest of our Bay Area counties and partners. And what we want to make sure is that people have a place to go from shelter once they are able to come inside. Our key informants, we had some wonderful quotes from people who participated in focus groups, surveys, who gave us comments on our initial draft of the Home Together plan. We have tried to make sure in our county, in our continuum of care, that we have at least a third of our governing body is informed by people who have experienced homelessness. So the Home Together plan recommends some really specific things that we need to do in order to end homelessness in this county. We would need over 4,000 additional supportive housing units, over 3,000 supportive housing units that are specifically for older and frail adults, over 10,000 affordable units or subsidies. So these are for people who don't necessarily need intensive services, but based on their income cannot move into private market housing in this county because the rents are so high. We need more than 5,000 new shallow subsidies, programmed at our partners in Oakland and Berkeley and Hayward are all piloting right now to prevent people from becoming homeless when they're rent burdened. And then over 1,600 additional rapid rehousing slots for people who are able to increase their income over time through earned income or through shared housing where they may not need permanent support. A total, as you can see, of 24,000 additional units and subsidy slots. And that is because even though every year we're housing more than 3,000 people out of homelessness, we're seeing 4,000 to 7,000 people becoming homeless during that same time. So our services for unsheltered residents, a little bit of focus of the topic today. Our office merged in January of 2022 with Healthcare for the Homeless. And it's been wonderful to all be under one roof to really support each other and to make sure that there's a continuum from people who are living in encampments, who are unsheltered, getting healthcare and outreach services all the way into permanent housing. Our street health teams provide outreach engagement, they provide medical assessment, they will diagnose and treat conditions while on the street. They have brought out thousands and thousands of COVID vaccines, other immunizations, and provide health education. They also do coordinated entry assessments out in the field. This is something that we were really committed to pioneering in Alameda County, and it's been a great asset for people to be able to go through the sort of, sorry, but bureaucratic processes to try to access housing without having to, walk around potentially on foot trying to find where you can get assistance. Our street health teams can bring that out to people where they are. Healthcare for the Homeless is divided up in the county into 14 zones across our 5 regions of the county. Each zone, they work with about 500 individuals. The staffing ratio, still, you end up with one of our street health team members to every 140 people experiencing homelessness. Each region now has a program services coordinator in the Office of Homeless Care and Coordination to work with cities, with service providers, and with coordinated entry. So we created this geographic model that varies according to the urban and rural areas. Coordinated entry, as Supervisor Carson and Vince both pointed out, is the approach to helping people access the resources they need. It should at heart just be a matching program, but because we don't have enough housing and shelter at this time, it is a program where we help people to understand what their resources are, and we prioritize based on the level of need, the level of vulnerability, and the length of time people have been homeless. Coordinated entry provides housing problem solving so that if someone has been living with a relative and just lost that housing, we can try to help them get back to the last place they were. They also do the housing assessments and help people get referrals to shelter, housing, and other services in our system. These are the coordinated entry access points. We went from 5 access points in 2019 to 11 access points today, in addition to adding sites in each part of the county that are specific to families with minor children. We've also added now sites for transition age youth, and we're working on opening an access point we've been piloting for people who are fleeing intimate partner violence and trafficking. Some recent initiatives. In the Room Keep program, I just wanted to point out that we served, in the end, over 3,000 people. And of the people who went through the program and exited, 71% of those folks went on to permanent housing, which is really an exceptional rate of finding housing, much higher than a lot of emergency shelters, because we lined up the housing resources to pair with that program. And as you can see, because the program was really geared toward people who would be most likely to experience the severe impacts of COVID, we served over 60% in that program were over the age of 50. We went through already the Home Key Awards. This is just a breakdown of round 1 and round 2. You can see cities all over Alameda County have submitted, and many have been awarded these new sites. We also recently had awards for the community care expansion for people who are medically frail. This will bring on an additional 300 units. And the county has been providing matching services for the St. Regis and the Alameda Wellness Center for people who are medically frail. And then No Place Like Home for people with serious mental illnesses. Alameda County now has 22 projects funded in No Place Like Home. This was the measure that allowed us to create bond financing from the Mental Health Services Act. Representing over 558 No Place Like Home units in the county. And we're now seeing those units from round 2 and round 3 opening up in cities throughout the county. And with that, I will be quiet and stick around for questions, and just thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Kerry. We appreciate that overview. Thank you both, Kerry and Supervisor Carson, for that Alameda County perspective. Next up, I want to bring in someone from Oakland to talk to us about how they're addressing the crisis on their end. I'm going to bring in LaTonda Simmons. She is the Assistant City Administrator for the City of Oakland, and Simone Falls, the Health and Human Services Planner, to talk to us about their efforts in Oakland. Thank you both.
Thank you very much for having us this evening. It's great to see you, Kerry, and of course, great to see you, Supervisor Carson. It's been a while. Very pleased to be here tonight. I'm joined, of course, with Simone Falls, who is serving as the Acting Community Homelessness Services Manager, and really leading in a significant way from the Human Services Department, a lot of the work as it relates to serving our unhoused community. Bear with me as I try to get this presentation up. I have 2 screens and I'm not sure that this will go entirely the way that I will want it to. So we're going to try presentation mode. And hopefully it won't make me look too bad here. Bear with me. Okay, assuming all goes well here. Okay. Let me know if you are able to see it. I am unable to see you.
Yes, we
can see it.
We can see it.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for having us this evening. We have a number of slides here. We may move a bit quickly. We noticed that your slides were a little bit more lean than ours. And we do recognize that in some respects, some of the conversation that we will have with you tonight includes data that you already have as the county, and we're somewhat preaching to the choir. So I want to first just acknowledge and appreciate the departments. We have gathered information across our departments that speaks to a spectrum in terms of the response that the city provides across a number of departments to respond to homelessness. And just want to acknowledge our Human Services Department in whole, our Housing and Community Development Departments, of course, City Administrator's Office, but moreover, the civic partners and the other organizational partners that make this work possible, as daunting as it is. And of course, the Community and Homelessness Services Division, who is really putting a lot of work into this. We're going to move forward with just some general background details. I'm going to give it to Ms. Simone Falls to be able to just frame what you all know about our city, but share with the community here. Whenever you're ready, Simone.
Thank you. You could go ahead to the next slide. I think this is a fact that we all know already, that homelessness is unfortunately one of the biggest issues we're facing, not only in Oakland, but in the county as a whole. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is point in time count data, which Kerry did dive into. This is specific to Oakland, and you can see that there was an increase in homelessness between the 2019 point in time count and the 2022 point in time count. One thing to note here is the decrease in the rate of increase of homelessness. So from 2017 to 2019, there was, I believe it's a 47% rate of increase of homelessness, and that decreased to 24% over the next 3 years. And we do attribute a lot of that to many of the interventions that were stood up in response to COVID, and a lot of funding that came out of COVID, and a lot of lessons learned about what truly works to support the homeless population. Next slide. This slide details the main point here is showing that the city of Oakland makes up nearly 50% of the homeless population in Alameda County. So therefore, it is important that we have a large investment and robust programming in the city of Oakland. You can see here a breakdown of where people were identified as living during the point in time count. The majority of people are living in an unsheltered status, showing here 1,063 in tents and 1,031 in a car van. And what's newer to the city of Oakland over the last few years is the vast increase in people living in RV structures, both operational and non-operational RVs. Next slide. So one thing that we know about homelessness is the disparities, the equity concerns around the populations impacted by homelessness. Both men and both Black Americans are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. And this shows here that 62.9% of individuals identify as male, and the majority identify as, I guess, what we would call middle age. I don't know if that's still a proper term, but middle age at this point. Next slide. And you saw the county breakdown of race across the whole county. This is specific to Oakland. You can see that 21% of individuals identify as Black or African American in the general population. This is according to the federal census, versus a 59% of homeless individuals who identify as Black or African Americans. You can see there is an equity concern here. Another equity concern that does not necessarily jump out on the page is the inability to adequately identify the percentage of individuals who identify as Latin or Hispanic, as they are currently only identified as an ethnicity and not a separate race. Next slide. think I'm passing it back to you.
Yes. And at this point, we'll begin to talk about the City of Oakland's homelessness systems and the response that we've coordinated across departments. And we'll highlight, if you will, again, the more prominent players. It is no question, and of course, no surprise that homelessness touches every department in the City of Oakland in some way or some form. The particular departments in question that we will focus on specifically would be our Housing and Community Development departments, our Human Services Department, and of course, the Office of the City Administrator, most recently having established a Division of Homelessness Administration, promulgated from the creation of the Homelessness Administrator position that was created in 2019. As we kind of go through the continuum, we'll start with focusing on the specific areas that each of the departments lend their expertise to, and we'll begin with focusing on the prevention aspect, because of course we know that one of the most important opportunities that we have as service providers is to prevent individuals from moving into the unsheltered status. Our Human Services Department did evaluate, with the assistance of a partnership with Stanford, a number of interviews with our unhoused community, approximately 80 interviews that focus, not our unhoused community, but those that were in very low and extremely low income renters. They interviewed about 80 of the individuals across the languages of English, Chinese, and Spanish to focus on understanding more deeply, what the barriers are to accessing programs and finding housing. You can see on the right that the interviews, the breakdown by race was 22.4% Latinx, 27.6% Black, 21.1% white, and then API identifying at 28.9%. From those conversations and within the spectrum of the housing department, they set forth to focus on some very specific goals that they knew were elements in terms of the barriers to attaining, to finding and sustaining the ability to keep affordable housing. I'm so sorry, my coffee is wearing off. And those areas included legal support, ways in which they could provide flexible financial payments, wraparound services to remove other barriers, and of course, the expansion of outreach. And what we know is that these same barriers, which specifically are root causes to homelessness here in Oakland, are amongst many other root causes. And that's derived from the Continuum of Care's racial equity impact analysis, showing the number of barriers that absolutely impact sustainable access to sustainability in housing, and that create housing vulnerability, but moreover, promote barriers to being able to find affordable housing. And you see on the right that these three particular areas, displacement, the general representation in terms of barriers to housing, which includes discrimination, and the inability to increase one's income, were unique root causes to Oakland. These specific initiatives in terms of the issues really build upon prior work. Supervisor Carson spoke about the direct work with our prior mayor, Libby Schaaf, and other legislators that were focused on the development of programs that would assist in these areas. And they build on prior initiatives such as Oakland Housing Secure, Keep Oakland Housed, and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And of course, HCD's goal is to target those residents most at risk with the utilization of an upcoming RFP, and typically the RFPs that they have issued in the past, to be able to promote ways that they can come up with resources to address these root causes. We're now going to move to intervention. Intervention is the space where the city administrator's office and the housing department, and particularly though the human services department, collaborate on the responses to individuals where we find on the streets who are in the state of homelessness. And I mentioned earlier that in the response to homelessness, there are specific departments that lead, but I wanted to underscore that across the city, a number of departments contribute specific responsibilities and time and resources according to their functional responsibilities to band together to address not only homelessness, but the impacts of homelessness on the environment and in the public rights of way. And that would be our encampment management team. It spans across 8 departments primarily, already included the Department of Human Services, but specifically those departments that would seek to mitigate the health and safety risks that they find in the environments in encampments. And the goal of this work is to stabilize the environment, to mitigate, again, those health and safety interventions, those health and safety elements that pose greater danger to the unhoused community and even those neighbors nearby, but also to utilize this as an opportunity to mobilize, shifting our unhoused members into interventions that can improve the conditions that they're experiencing or the quality of life that they're experiencing. And that work is a joint effort at this stage of the work, predominantly led by the encampment management team, but really utilizing the expansive services that are made available to us by our Human Services Department. And this is just another slide to really talk about the encampment management policy. In its introduction, in terms of its most recent passage in 2020, there have been a number of questions that, that focused on what the intent of the policy is. Well, the policy's intent is to assist both sheltered and unsheltered residents and to manage the adverse impacts of homeless encampments by balancing the interests of both the unhoused and the residents that live nearby and the businesses as well. And this is because we do know that, the ability to close an encampment and the ability to solve for homelessness involves there needing to be affordable housing and additional shelter spaces to be able to shift people from where they are into these interventions. This is sort of also the Martin B. Voisey conundrum that's related to the 9th Circuit Court District here that says that before we could close an encampment, we must have a place for people to go. And so that absolutely is structurally significant in terms of the work that the encampment management team is able to do. This focuses on encampments with respect to mitigating those negative outcomes. And again, I talked about those health and safety conditions, which are about 13 identified health and safety conditions according to the policy that range from environmental issues as well as health issues, biological health issues. And so this is where the policy serves to be a pathway to assisting the community into moving into a different space. The policy focuses on high and low sensitivity areas, areas where the concentration of homelessness and the impacts and the elements of homelessness have more of a greater adverse impact to the community there and those surrounding it. It focuses on ways of better managing those areas that would be considered low sensitivity zones, but providing services to support those that would be in those areas. We talked about the findings, which consist of about 13 different health and safety findings, as well as specific proximity determinants that serve as the criteria to advance the team into moving into areas to resolve encampment issues. And specifically, though, more than anything, it's not solely focused on infrastructure. We recognize that while we are addressing the conditions there, that it is also our obligation to meet the needs of the unhoused. And so these are the moments when we have an opportunity, of course, as we address infrastructure, to use these resources connected to our Human Services Department and even our partners here at the county to transition individuals from these encampments into better spaces. And this is also where what I call the very rich work of learning how to meet the needs of individuals so that we can take that learning back and contribute it into the spaces such as these so that we can develop strategies that better serve the community, centered in equity and specifically harm reduction, noting that for each activity that we perform out there, we have a community that is filled with trauma, based on the things that they're experiencing on the street, as well as those that have encroached into encampment environments and are sort of taking advantage of our unhoused as they are in encampment environments. With that, since the launch of the 2020 encampment management policy, the city has instituted as of September approximately 361 closures and deep cleanings. We've expanded our sanitation support focused on regular garbage runs and containerized garbage runs to approximately 7,000 at the end of September, for a total of about 7,300 interventions as of that date. What we don't have here, and I failed to include it, would be a comparison of the work that had been performed before this policy was expanded. And that would be that, approximately 200 closures had been executed maybe about 2 years ago, between 2018 up to 2020, and maybe about 1,500 garbage runs. But it speaks to the amount of suppression activity that has been performed under the current policy. And what I would tell you to date is that we're probably at approximately 400 and about 40 interventions having focus on closures, partial closures, reclosures, and even deep cleanings. And I would say our regular garbage pickups and runs are at approximately just probably beneath 9,000 at this point. Those activities were expanded by way of additional investments that were made into the encampment management team, expanding our Keep Oakland Clean and Beautiful support, and that would be our Public Works Division, adding painters to be able to give us some ability to power wash areas, expanding our Human Services Department by adding 2 case managers to be able to assist with navigation support and engagement with the unhoused community. Of course, expanding the Homelessness Administrative Division by adding a program analyst too, and another admin assistant, adding additional investments across our other departments, which includes parks and sanitation in terms of the Homelessness Administration dollars to be able to expand that work, additional dollars to expand trash pickup for the Public Works team. And specifically for sanitation services, while it's regarded as sanitation services here, it would be an expansion of team support. These dollars actually translated into additional public works staff to be able to add to the suppression activities that the city had prescribed in its encampment management policy. And that included additional components such as hotel vouchers hotel dollars to be able to support unique interventions where the interventions as they're regarded in the field, the deep cleanings and closures. When we are matching needs to our unhoused community, sometimes the resources in terms of the availability of shelter and housing is so low that we often will have to place people in hotels until such time that we can have interventions and program slots made available for them. And then, of course, there have been other stipends associated with the homelessness, actually our Commission on Homelessness, which is most recently a body that has been instituted to be able to provide us with guidance and oversight in terms of encampment management and homelessness spending. In addition to that, those investments were ancillary to these additional contributions that have been made, and that would be standing up many more interventions to be able to provide people places to go. Estelle, if you'll allow me, I'm prepared to really let you do this slide. Your team is really led in the intervention space in terms of standing up these interventions. Would you like to cover this? I'm sorry, Simone.
Yeah, I see Estelle is here though. And has
she raised her hand.
No worries. Yes, so we have added additional programming over the last couple of years. Specifically here, you'll see that in fiscal year 21-22, we added another RV safe parking site. It added 40 slots in West Oakland for people residing in RVs. On East 12th, we have a cabin navigation center, and 3rd and Peralta, we also have a cabin navigation center. Those are 2 sites that are short-term interim housing for people residing on the street that are looking for shelter and support. That includes housing navigation and on-site staff and security. Then we also have Lao Family that opened up at the Kerry campus in East Oakland. This is nearby the Project Roomkey hotels. If you're familiar with those, it is in that same area. And that is transitional housing that includes a workforce component. And this is intended to rapidly transition people to permanent housing once they've acquired employment. This latest fiscal year, we've added Beach Street, another RV safe parking site, and 2 programs coming in the next month. Wood Street Community Cabins, it's another navigation center alongside the Wood Street area of West Oakland, and then 66th Avenue Safe Parking is also an RV safe parking site in the East Oakland area of the city.
So adding approximately a little over 300 units, almost 400 in fact, in terms of shelter spaces to give people options, as well as maintaining the approximately, what is it? Forgive me, Simone. I feel like it's another 16 programs that are that have been stood up by our Human Services Department. So a substantial investment and a substantial amount of support in providing crisis beds to ensure that people have a place to go. Structural considerations for improving this specific work absolutely lend to the increase of the inventory of transitional and permanent supportive housing. We recognize that crisis beds are a short-term answer, but the goal is to deliver people to housing. And what we do know is that while we have stood up a substantial number of crisis beds, it is important that those beds serve us such that they can cycle and support other members of the community. And by having more transitional and permanent housing at the income levels, it would be sustainable for these individuals. We can improve the flow-through system. We're also focusing on improving our levels of outreach and our system navigation and our specific outcomes. Just recognizing that the calibration of the encampment management policy is just a policy standard for how we will clean and clear, but we are also focused on the expansion of support and the recalibration of some of our programs in our Human Services Department to ensure that we are targeting equity needs as it relates to the community, and that we are also, sorry about that, that we are also ensuring that people move through systems successfully. And then of course, ensuring that individuals are connected with our county, state, and federal resources. I want to call out the county and Kerry, Abbott, and Lifelong, and many partners there who have done some tremendous work with us. One of the most noteworthy endeavors that we collaborated on related to the closure of Wood Street in terms of state property. And it was the most expansive area of the Wood Street encampment area. And at the closure of it, as it was promulgated by the state, Caltrans, the county was able to work so very closely with the City of Oakland Human Services Department to come up with the resources to ensure that those individuals that were being moved off those spaces had the opportunity to receive housing and shelter offers, to receive services, and to get the attentive need to be able to help them through the transition of moving from one space into others. And it was a substantial amount of work. It was a massive endeavor. I think the engagement included outreach to more than 200 individuals, expanding from the deeper portions of the state property, which is an expanse about a 2-mile long swath and about a 1/4 mile wide, onto the City of Oakland rights of way. And so that was a huge win and an incredible collaboration. And we're thankful for the work that was put in. And then the last piece, of course, would be that in these massive endeavors with our in-house community, we want to make sure that we are in alignment and tracking our system performance and really monitoring those metrics to ensure that we're achieving the outcomes that we're seeking. And we know that the coordinated entry system is essential in this work, and this is where I'll hand it back over to Simone.
Thank you. So Kerry touched on coordinated entry quite a bit. We do, this is one way that we coordinate with the County of Alameda around placing individuals into long-term housing solutions. So for example, our Henry and Holland transitional housing locations go through the coordinated entry system in order to identify individuals who are in need of that type of support. Transitional housing is a great program for the unsheltered population. It is a program that allows you to stay in one location for a duration of up to 2 years with on-site supportive services. Coordinated entry is something that we look forward to being able to work more closely with the county. We recently transitioned completely working underneath the county. We previously did have coordinated entry within Oakland specifically. And so I think it's a good fit that we're able to work more collaboratively with the county on this HUD mandated process. And I'm also excited about the transitional age youth access point that was recently added. And I think I don't want to give too much time to this because I know we're running out of time, but yes, thank you.
And of course, the goals of our Human Services Department, and as we launch these interventions, are to close racial disparities, I'm sorry, in entries to and exits from homelessness. We just recognize that there's a substantial amount of work that needs to be done to be able to improve systems, but the goal obviously is to ensure that fewer people either become homeless, and also to maintain and increase our crisis beds. We recognize that there's some economic changes that are forthcoming, and it could be a contributor to our unhoused population, and we're deeply concerned about that. And we wish to rehouse people as quickly as we can and stabilize their incomes and address the other root causes of unsheltered homelessness. You want to go here?
Sure. And also just on the previous slide, I did want to note that the city of Oakland is also in partnership with the county on the Home Together plan that Kerry described. So we are aligned in that area and working collaboratively to move towards meeting those goals. This slide here describes many of the different interventions that we fund in the city of Oakland. Our crisis beds are typically speaking to our navigation centers, often known as community cabins, our safe parking sites, our emergency brick and mortar shelters such as SVDP and Crossroads, as in addition to our family shelters. And that goes along with our emergency shelters. I'd like to point out here, our emergency shelters, we do have 2 interventions that were stood up in direct response to COVID. We have our Lake Merritt Lodge and our home base site. Home base is our trailer site meant for individuals who are identified as vulnerable to COVID, and Lake Merritt Lodge is an old dorm across the street from Lake Merritt. It's a beautiful site, and it also serves people who are vulnerable to the effects of COVID. We have several health and hygiene sites. Our case managers manage sites, encampment sites, by providing hygiene services such as porta potties, hand washing stations, and also mobile showers. We also have stationary shower units that we are beginning to place at all of our sites. We've been placing them at our new sites and are working towards adding them to our pre-existing sites. Housing navigation is part of our programs. It's the goal, of course, is to, 1, have a safe place for people to be able to sleep and lay their head and have a place to be able to focus on their next needs, but also to be able to help people transition into permanent housing. So that's where our housing navigation comes in partnership with our programs. OPRI is Oakland initiative. It is rapidly housing people from the street directly into permanent housing. There are some steps that may take place depending on the assessment. There may be an initial stay in shelter, and that then transitions to rapid rehousing. You do have the option to move directly into rapid rehousing. Permanent housing interventions go through coordinated entry for the county. So we do support that process, and we work with the county in order to transition people from our programs directly into permanent supportive housing. And that process goes through the access points where people go through the coordinated entry assessment and are able to then be matched to units where they can reside for the remainder of their time. Rapid rehousing is similar to transitional housing. It's scattered sites, so there are not on-site services, and it's intended for people who are able to work and able to increase their income and eventually pay for their housing independently. HMOP is our street outreach team. We do have a street outreach in Oakland that works independently and in collaboration with the county of Alameda. County of Alameda has street teams, and we also work with our local clinics. So they all work collaboratively together, and we are working on enhancing those partnerships as well to ensure that information is shared adequately. And lastly, transitional housing, which I did speak to earlier. Next slide.
This just reconstitutes it a different way, I know.
Yes, this slide, it's same information, but does give specifics to programs that we do manage. I will just highlight a few of them here. So Youth Spirit Artworks is a program that we fund at our Hagenberger site. We also help fund the Covenant House Transitional Housing Rapid Rehousing programs. Those are 2 transitional age youth projects. We fund our Lake Merritt Lodge and Home Base, which I spoke to, which is for vulnerable individuals. We fund the Holland and the Henry are in transitional housing programs. St. Vincent de Paul is a congregate shelter, and Crossroads is as well, which are important projects to note because sometimes people need very, very low barrier services, which these shelters both provide. And sometimes people also just need a break for the night, which is okay if you want to come into the shelter for a night or two. And so this is a program that allows for those conditions where programs such as transitional housing are not built for that type of shelter. I'll leave it there. So a lot of programs, many programs that we fund, and we're still looking to expand, knowing that the need is great, and we're still working to meet that need. Right, so these are our outcomes. This gives an example of exits in the system. And I have some other outcomes I wanted to share as well. You can see here permanent housing exits from all of our programs show 481 compared to 380 to homeless outcomes, exits rather. And I just wanted to note a difference between 2 of our programs. So I did just state that St. Vincent de Paul and Crossroads, sometimes those programs serve as just short-term 1 or 2 night stays for people, which is just fine. And sometimes they may be longer-term stays, which lead to permanent housing. So if you look at the programs differently, where there are long-term programs such as transitional housing and rapid rehousing, the exits to permanent housing are at 76%. Versus exits to homelessness from those programs are at 5%. Now, if you look at our crisis bed interventions, such as our navigation centers and our emergency shelters, exits to permanent housing are 24% and exits to homelessness are 45%. And this is a breakdown of our funding. It's a large scale breakdown. So it's showing that the majority of our funds are one-time funds. It's a big point to make there. A lot of our funds come from the state. A lot of our funds towards homelessness are HAP funds, and they are not guaranteed to continue year after year. So we must plan on a short-term basis without knowing what may or may not come in the coming years. We have recently applied and received the Encampment Resolution Fund, which is funding our Wood Street cabin site. And we continue to seek additional funding opportunities to be able to enhance our programming and add to our programming.
And I would just say, and we'll move quickly through the remaining slides because we know we're coming to time, is that we have a problem recognizing that it is long-term and enduring. And both cities and counties have been placed in the position of seeking competitive resources for, short-term dollars, if you will, for long-term structural problems. And that's an opportunity for us to align so that we can actually move metrics and really speak to perhaps our state partners to compel them to dedicate some ongoing resources to this kind of work. What we do know is that it takes a substantial amount of time to acquire and or build housing. And what we see is that with the disproportionate impact to the African-American community, by the time that they would have to endure the number of years in current status on the streets, they may not even be alive to have the opportunity to engage those housing opportunities. And that's something that requires a level of urgency across all organizations. The disproportionate impact to our African-American community and our Latinx community, and seeing the numbers that correlate with what the county put out most recently in its mortality report, with 55% of those individuals dying in a state of homelessness in the streets. That is a call for concern. That is a crisis call, and nothing underscores an emergency, in my opinion, more than that. So just quickly, of course, the back end of the process would be that once we move people through homelessness mitigation, that we're able to place them in permanent housing. Of course, coordinated entry is essential, and also the placement of people in permanent housing. But we recognize that across the state, most certainly in our city, that there is a dearth, if you will, of affordable housing units. And so I just wanted to point that out and just talk about the strategies that the housing department is embarking upon in terms of what they're currently using as strategies for placement. Of course, they're working with the Housing Authority, the Housing and Community Development Department itself through the programs that it writes up and the dollars that it competes for. And of course, our Human Services Department with its strategies on rapid rehousing. In addition, the Housing Department uses its NOFA to be able to administer funds for housing development. And current NOFAs include the use of Home Key for rapid acquisition and conversion, new construction, creation of multifamily affordable rental, and scoring prioritizes projects with more dedicated ELI and PSH units and neighborhoods experiencing displacement and emerging developers. And those go to some of those core concerns that were identified as root causes. Acquisition and conversion to affordable housing converts market rate rental to affordable with set aside for co-ops and land trust, and of course, preservation supports rehab needs of existing portfolio buildings. Here's some of the numbers that relate to the production in our housing department. I won't go into them in great detail. I'm trying to move a little bit more quickly, recognizing the amount of time that we've taken, but we will also share these slides after this presentation. And then, of course, this also details the specific sources, and you'll see from the fiscal year 21-22 budget across all resources, based on some of the emergency dollars also that were made available, the housing department had $36,714,927. But in the 22-23 budget, we're seeing $24,118,865. Now, this does not speak to the dollars that will come from Measure U that was successfully passed this November, that will deliver some money to support this work. The staff is currently working on a spending plan to ensure that those dollars have the most significant impact to this work. So our core focus areas, and we're down to the last slide for the most part, is to work on implementing improvements to systems and operations, to expand our resources across the continuum to increase extremely and very low affordable housing, services from our Human Services Department and that of our Housing Department and even our encampment management teams, and to increase the staffing to support those needs. Importantly, it's also critical that we measure our progress, the system's performance and those outcomes, that we center these strategies in equity, and that we also include the expansion of health services for the Oakland homeless community. Just noting that the governor did sign off on the bill that focuses on care court, but recognizing that the implementation did not include Alameda County and will not reach this county until I feel like it's 2025, if I'm not mistaken by the legislation. And there's tremendous need here. I will say, though, that as that policy is deployed and that program is deployed, I would hope that the county and the city will take upon the opportunity to look also at the other parts of systemic racism where such tools could have also another disproportionate impact on the African-American community who are suffering from trauma, suffering from homelessness, but should not necessarily have their rights and privileges be taken away and their autonomy taken away without sufficient exploration into their needs, and not simply putting them as wards of the court for the purposes of simply moving them off the streets. So I just wanted to emphasize that. And of course, there's the expanding interest in, of course, our housing development strategy. And I just want to say, and we're about done, this continuum that we talk about, and I would hope that the supervisor could deeply appreciate these comments, really reflect what local jurisdictions and counties have had to kind of put together at the loss of redevelopment agency dollars. No one wants to talk about it. It's a bit of a Washington monument, but what I do know is California, I'm born and raised here. California has been unaffordable the entire time California has been California. And what we do know is redevelopment agency dollars were absolutely essential in stabilizing affordability and at least keeping local pipelines from municipal governments in terms of the development of affordable housing moving. And the loss of that bears a correlation to the escalation of homelessness. And I think that we should study that and talk about it and also elevate those disproportionate impacts as well. So our strategies include aggregating our resources to combine forces and dollars so that we can approach addressing the homelessness issues and those absolutely more deeply impacted by homelessness, centered in principles of equity. And with this strategy, we look forward to continuing to work with the county. We'll include in the slides and share with the slides the ways in which you can contact the city departments for any questions that you may have or needs that you may have across the spectrum and the departments that support this work. And we want to thank you for giving us certainly a few more minutes than you had planned to walk through all of our slides. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say also to close out, thank you for having me as well. And just that we know that homelessness requires intentional and impactful coordination, and we're doing that within the city and working on enhancing that, and look forward to continuing to also enhance our collaboration with the county. And I did want to appreciate Supervisor Carson's comment about the partnership with Councilmember Cobb and continuing to see those partnerships grow, knowing that that is how we will enhance the work that we're doing. So it's just great to hear that that's happening already.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, LaTonda and Simone. We appreciate that detail of the overview that you just gave us, and everything that you hit on, especially the fact that our public policy needs to prioritize those that are, suffering, and we need to make sure that we're bringing resources forth first. So thank you for talking about the encampment management policy. What we're going to do is move directly to questions and answers right now. We want to make sure there's some people dropping off. We're a little bit over, so we want to make sure we catch some questions from folks in our audience. So if anyone has a question right now, please raise your hand and we will call on you to ask it out loud. And team, I can't see anything, so help me if there are.
Vince, while we're waiting for that, I don't know if Peter has any salient points that he want to make about Berkeley, because I know he has had an opportunity to work over at the city of Oakland as well as Berkeley, and while he may not do a full presentation, there may be some key points that Peter may make.
Sure.
Thank you, Supervisor. For the public, my name is Peter Redu. I manage the Neighborhood Services Division in the City Manager's Office for the City of Berkeley. And I was going to do a deep dive kind of into the city of Berkeley's homeless response team, which in many ways is similar to the encampment management team for the city of Oakland. Honestly, there's probably not much that I could say that LaTonda didn't already say. So I suggest we just go straight to questions and answers. And if there's anything about Berkeley, I'm happy to take them.
And we have our first question from Brent Turner. Go ahead, Brent.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I've looked at a place in Alameda. It was called the Alameda Point Collaborative. I liked what they were doing there. So my question was, would the city and the county be willing to partner with other counties and probably finding like a stretch of land that more housing organizations like that to help with this situation, because they're doing employment there. They have job training, on the job training, workforce development, education services, and they're doing things for homeless people with kids. I know the situation like I've seen over the last 10 years just keeps getting worse. So I'm looking at something that would be actually sustainable, feasible, and actually help reduce the homelessness. So if there was like a stretch of land that more organizations like that could be developed, not necessarily that organization, but I'm just saying something more like that would provide complete wraparound services for the people. So would the county and then cities within the county think about partnering with other cities and counties outside of Alameda County just to figure out some land to do something like that?
So I'm familiar with the Alameda Point Collaborative project. Very familiar with it myself. All considerations are on the table. We're not taking any of the considerations off, especially programs that may be working. One of the key points is being able to identify long-term funding in order to employ these. I mean, we had a lot of one-time monies as a result of the pandemic, COVID, CARES Act money, and the American Rescue money that is one-time monies under the guise of dealing with the pandemic that gave us a bump up on attempting to set up a number of programs. But once those dollars are gone, as was referenced earlier, general fund dollars have to be used, and general fund dollars and not any of the cities or the county basically have an intended use, and many of those are providing these basic services that all of us need. But nothing is off the table. These same conversations are being elevated even more so in Sacramento, looking at across the state and the nation, what works and what we can adapt to as opposed to reinventing something that's already there.
We have a question from Nancy Nadell.
Yes, thank you very much. I saw that I know we have about 6,000 people homeless, if not more, and only 800 housed. LaTonda, I really appreciate your stressing the emergency of the situation. It's an emergency situation. And yet we know we don't have $2.5 billion, which another slide said is needed to house everybody. So why aren't we saying to the state, we don't have enough money, this is a FEMA emergency, and the state, if they can't come up with that money, must go to the feds and say, we need your help. The federal government had stopped funding affordable housing years and years and years ago, and that's a good part of the problem. So when are we going to recognize we do not have $2.5 billion and go to the state? If they don't have it, they can't house their 64,000 people in LA. We have to pressure the federal government to put the money into this. What's the objection to that?
There is no objection to that. That's one of the things I was in Sacramento today. Finance director for the state of California was present at the meeting. We're meeting next week in Southern California around the same thing as it relates to homelessness. And We have been very vocal, and the governor in particular has been very vocal that this is more than just a crisis. It's an impact on people's lives, those who are unhoused and those who live in and around the places where they are. You know, I think it was mentioned earlier when we lost redevelopment dollars, that had a major impact on what we're experiencing today. But we are and will be in February in Washington, D.C., having that same conversation with the White House and the administration.
Brian Bloom.
Thanks. Thanks you all for a great presentation. Thanks in advance for making the slides available to us in some fashion in the future. I'm piggybacking on the last question. Is there the political will in this county to raise the kind of money? It sounds like $500 million a year for 5 years if the Home Together plan, which is an excellent document, if that's right. Is there the political will in this county through some kind of a real estate transfer tax and I know the counties have limited ways to raise money, but you know, there are examples. California's taxed millionaires to create the Mental Health Services Act. It compromises almost 30% of the treatment that we give to mentally ill folks. Isn't there will in this county to put something on the ballot that we can tax ourselves in a progressive way, in a very progressive ways for high-end real estate or whatever? I'm not an expert on it, but it seems to me, I mean, I appreciate your work so much. But as LaTonda says, this is a dire emergency. I can't even imagine what it would look like without the hard, dedicated work of you good folks doing all this. And yet it's still, 10,000 people on the streets every night. Is there the will to raise the money in our county to solve or to do a better job on this problem?
Yeah, there is that will, and that will is shown every 2 or 4 years when we take these initiatives and measures from the city and the county to the voters to see if they support that will. That's how we got the Measure 1A monies to begin with.
Okay, we're going to take one more question.
Thurman Carroll.
Hi, thank you, and I apologize. Some of my question may have been answered already. But I'm wondering, so is there a comprehensive 20-year generational plan to address not just the folks that are homeless today, but addressing simultaneously the issues that contribute to homelessness? Because this is the thing. I mean, we're looking at what we need is a WPA program to come in nationwide, federal, state, and local dollars to address this top to bottom, meeting all the needs. This, it's about education, prenatal care, top to bottom, the judicial system, incarceration, the elderly, medical care. All of it. Until we address those things that contribute to homelessness, we're putting a bandage on it. And if we're talking about $2.5 billion to address 8,000 to 10,000 homeless folks in one county over 5 years, you're talking about an expenditure of $250,000 to $312,000 per person.
Yeah, I think the frustration leading to, in some cases, anger that people raise around these issues all day, each and every day are very real, and I probably associate with 98, if not 100% of the comments. The way that this government is structured throughout the history has been that those issues are debated each and every day in Washington, D.C., in various subcommittees and in terms of the proposed budget of the administration, who is ever the administration at that time. The same thing in Sacramento and the same thing in local government, meaning county and cities. For the county's part, 80% of the revenue that we get to operate, which comes from the federal and state government, is mandated and it's outlined on how we are supposed to spend those dollars. We have roughly almost 20%, which might be discretionary to add in those. And we try to do that based on what is the most emergent need at that time with those 20%, at least here in Alameda County. And might I say, regardless of whether it's rural, suburban, or urban counties across the state of California, they're probably doing the same thing. And so I'm not being trite or attempting to be flippant about my response. That's the context in which we operate daily, is in that context that has been set up by the structure in the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the state of California. And those things are debated each and every day. And you have a direct voice in the people you elect to serve on your behalf every 2, 4, and in some cases 6 years currently. And the same thing to come to meetings, especially where these decisions roll down the hill from Washington, D.C. to Sacramento. I would challenge anybody to say that Congresswoman Lee is not a strong advocate for those issues in Washington, D.C. and the disbursement of those dollars to state and local government. And probably the same for the majority of the Northern California congressional delegation, including Nancy Pelosi and Ro Khanna and the rest. But these are things that are being debated every day, and in some way it's being covered in our local press, and you're also hearing about it on social media. And we just have to continue to put the pressure. But local government, for the most part, carries out the mandates that are established, pre-established, and continue to change out of Washington, D.C. and Sacramento. Same thing for the cities. The last point I'll make, because we are out of time, 25, 30 years ago, even when Nancy Nadell was on the Oakland City Council, there were state representatives in Washington, Sacramento, Secretary of State of, I can't remember her name, out of Southern California, happened to be a Republican, that was strongly advocating then for development of housing way back there 25 years ago throughout California. Strongly arguing for that, knowing that the population was increasing, knowing that planning decisions that are made on a local level normally have people who say, we care about all of these issues, but not in my backyard. Those voices seem to show up at a time of making decisions on the part of local politicians. And constantly, yes, we want a senior facility, we want a facility for unhoused individuals, we want facilities for returning citizens, we want facilities for young people who are not sheltered, for people who are physically challenged, but not here. Can we put it someplace else? And it's very difficult until we all have to link our arms and not just build high rises in which you pay $4,000 for a studio apartment, but low income, not affordable, low income workforce housing and shared housing for individuals, even as people still resist the building of affordable housing in their neighborhood.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you. We have reached the end. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, or the supervisor mentioned, actually, this is the first town hall in a 3-part series. We hope that you all can join us on March the 1st to discuss affordable housing. Each one of the speakers touched on the need for affordable housing in our community. We know that that is one of the solutions to addressing this crisis we're in. So join us on March 1st as we talk about that with another panel of experts. I want to thank you all. I want to thank our guest speakers, especially for your presentations and information and all the knowledge you dropped on us tonight. And our constituents and our community out there that stayed over. We really appreciate you being a part of this town hall. Thank you. Thank you all. I wish you the best and have a safe night.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you,
Thanks
Supervisor.
for having us.
Thanks, LaTonda and Simone and Peter as well.
Thank